Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition is a special as we are joined by Dr. Bernard Gassaway. He is a veteran educator, administrator, school leader, and a professor. And he has a lot to say about the role of a principal, being that he served in that capacity for a number of years. Let's welcome Dr. Bernard Gassaway to Cultural Caravan. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, there was a lot of conversation we had just talking about your role, but also your role right now as relates to training the future leaders in this capacity. Let's start with what influenced you. What encouraged you to decide to go into education?
I think looking back, my own education is what inspired me to become a school leader or school teacher, then ultimately a school leader. I came through the system and I was described or could be described as a wayward child or a troubled student who never really sort of fit within the public school system. So when my mother passed in 1986, I decided that I wanted to leave the desk job and do something that was more meaningful. So my why really is working with young boys in particular. I started out, but then eventually it grew into all young people, but working with them so that they could find a better way within the system, a way to exist within the system and not be damaged or traumatized by it. And so also so that mothers like my mother wouldn't have to suffer the way she did, with my behaviors. And so that was really the center of my why. And I've been motivated ever since based on that.
Now, you mentioned about the role of your early upbringing and how that inspired you to go into education. Let's talk about some of the people who were your mentors or inspired you as you went through this journey. Some of them you mentioned here, and I'm going to ask, as I indicate some of those that I see you listed, just briefly, what about these people were inspirational. Let's talk about the great Frank Mickens of Boys and Girls High School.
Yeah, Frank Mickens, he was definitely one of my key mentors. He was one who taught me that no job was too small and no job was too big when it came to working on behalf of our children. He saw himself, or he was actually a protector of children. And he felt there was a need to be that. And so I watched him more than what he said. I watched his behavior. So if there was a need to pick up a broom, he would pick up a broom. If there was a need to go have an interview or, go to City Hall, he would go to City Hall. If he needed to walk down Fulton Street, at dismissal time or during the morning entry to greet the children, to see to it that they get home safely, he was willing to put his life on the line for children. So he was a chief child advocate, and I like to model myself after that. He was also what I would call an exemplary community leader, well respected, not only by people within the school, but outside the school. And the last thing I'll say about him is courage. There's a capital C next to courage when you talk about Frank Mickens.
You also mentioned the great Dr. Adelie Sanford. Talk to us about her role in your life.
So when I think about Dr. Sanford, I think about what's really an acronym, CARE, when it say children are reason enough. And when she talks to anyone, she starts out by referring to them as my beloved. And so that compassion, that love, that dedication, that commitment for African people from African ancestry, it comes through anything that she does, anything that she says. And so I moved with faith, I moved with strength, I moved with power after experiencing her. When I say experiencing her, she was my professor when I was going through my school administration program. And the way we see her in our community is the way I saw her in the university. So she didn't change because she was in a different environment. She remained true to who she was and moved in that manner. And I took that from her, to move the way you are. Don't change because you're in a different environment. You are who you are and believe in yourself.
And you also mentioned the late great G2 Baba G2 Wabi Wiyusi, G2 Wiyusi.
Yeah, he came into my life later in my career, but he was what I called a gentle giant. He didn't have to say anything. It's just his presence. But I recall a story that he told me. Once he was standing on, I believe it was Fulton and Utica, and someone came up to him complaining about Gassaway, the things that Gassaway was doing. And basically what I was trying to do is make changes, and I knew that certain people wouldn't like those changes. But he said one thing to that person, which sort of it stuck with me. He said, Gassaway is my guy. And that was it. From that point on, I didn't have any problems with anyone talking about me in that community just on his strength alone. So I'm just so, and just when he would be around me, just to watch him, to watch how others reacted around him. And again, he didn't have to say much, but it was his presence that spoke volumes.
Last but certainly not least, Dr. Lester Young Jr.
Dr. Lester Young Jr., he to me is that preeminent educator. He has put things in place when he was a superintendent in District 13, like over 2 decades ago, that continue to be in effect today. When he speaks about teaching and pedagogy, he speaks from an expert position, but he also speaks from experience. He's a no-nonsense person, very serious about the work, and he built leaders. There are many leaders who've come from under his tutelage, and I feel proud to know him as a friend, but more importantly, as a mentor.
Now we're going to get to the heart of it. You made a decision to take all of your combined decades of experience as a teacher, as a school leader, as a superintendent, and even returning to school, Boys and Girls High School. And then you decided, look, I'm going to take this and now move to the level of trainer of educators and leaders. What made you decide to take that leap, and how has it been so far for you?
So the main reason behind taking the leap is because I realized that going through the ranks of becoming a school leader, you don't necessarily get, in my opinion, the training, the nuanced training that's required outside of the books. That most of my learning came when people invited guest speakers to the class, and so it was experiential. And so I would say that would stick with me, the experiences that these people had. And I said, I have a long history in education, and some meaningful experiences encountering influential people, whether they be children or adults. And so I wanted to bring all that I had experienced, sort of like to get future leaders to think about these things in the incubation, before they step out into the field. For me, I call it authenticity in terms of leadership, because I think it's important for future leaders to receive what I consider to be the truth, or at least the truths that are out there. And I found that there's some people who are preparing leaders, but they're not telling their real story. Mm-hmm. So my story as a leader is very diverse, but I'm also transparent about the good, the bad, and what may be described as the ugly. Because it's not as if in every endeavor that I would say that I was successful at what it is I was trying to attempt. And I think that we can learn as much from failure as we can about success. So I look at the holistic role of a school and or district leader, because I've served in both capacities. And I think the thing that has moved me forward was my ability to move in my truth as a person, and to understand also to move in my why, and always remember why it is that you're doing what you're doing. So I try to embed that in my students who I currently and have trained to become a school leader, is to first know yourself. Look in the mirror and say, do you first love the person who's in the mirror? Because it's going to be difficult for you to love children if you don't love yourself. All right, at least understand who you are. And of course, you need to understand others in terms of be able to put yourself in their shoes by way of empathy. And that's that human side of it. But then you also need to understand what I describe, or some people describe as the complexity of organizational life. It's difficult to relate to many different personalities, but that's the role of the leaders, to be able to pull all these people together, figure out who learns which way, and then address them and accordingly. And then who needs to be sort of like even disciplined, because that's a part of our reality as well.
Let's talk now about the role of a principal for those in the audience. Of course, obviously, parents know, principals, they're in school. What is the role of a principal as you defined it? And how does that role impact on the success and failure of a school?
Yeah, I think the principal is a critical position within the schools, and there's a direct correlation, I believe, between the quality of the principal, the quality of the teachers, and then the instruction that the children receive. The principal is empowered as a hiring agent, and so you, in theory, in practice as well, you're supposed to be able to hire the teachers. You want to be able to hire teachers who hold high expectations for children, because there is a correlation between teachers having high expectations for children and the success that the children experience in schools. So as a principal, you are technically an instructional leader. And being an instructional leader means that you have to get into the classroom, you have to support teachers in the work that they do. And then when they're not able to do it, you ought to, when I say support, provide some type of professional development. That could be one-on-one professional development, that could be whole school development, various types of development, instructional development. As a principal, you even to model for teachers in terms of get into the classroom, show them how to do or execute a particular lesson. Teach them in terms of what I would call like have an instructional framework. For example, in a particular lesson, you want to make sure perhaps that there's a discussion period, that the students are reading, that the teacher is assessing, and even the students are assessing, and that there's some component of writing. So you want to be able to talk about instruction and then model it and then expect it of your teachers. And then they in turn will model it and expect it of students. And so that's, to me, is the primary role of a principal, in addition to making sure that the children and the staff are in a safe environment. Right? You want to make sure that, as well as the broadest role of a principal is tend to branch out outside of the school and make those connections, those relationships, so you could then bring those into the school that can further impact the success of children in the school.
So let's talk again about talk about different types of leadership. When you talk about what is the distinction between what is known as transformational leadership versus servant leadership?
I look at transformational leadership is, and the key part of transformation is change, right? And so you start with looking to change a behavior or way of thinking of, let's say, individuals within your school. And the reason why you're looking to change it, because you're looking to create an alignment between the mission and vision of your school, which are critical, and the way we behave. And we behave based on our mindset. So if we're not thinking right when it comes to the way we should be serving children, as a leader, you want to influence the way people behave. I think the best way to do that is to model the appropriate behavior, right? And that's critical, because not what I say is more what I do. I think if we can carry that, we can go a long way. So the whole idea of transformation is to work on changing the mindset, or the way people be, the minds first and then the behavior second, so that can be aligned with the mission and vision of the school. But when you change the individual, then you branch out to thinking in terms of transformation, changing the organization or aspects of the organization. How does the school function? So you want the school to move lock and step in a manner in which at the end goal would be to benefit the children and the adults who are serving the children. Servant leadership is more broadly, when I think of servant leadership, I think of a person like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I even think about Barack Obama. Now think about the definition I just gave about transformation. I can imagine that when President Obama was in the White House, he was thinking globally about how to change things that would influence the greatest number or help the greatest number of people, right? He versus thinking about how am I going to develop my Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense. He was thinking more globally. Most people, when they think of servant leadership, they even refer to someone like Jesus Christ, being a person who's going to go out and look to improve the world. So more to our level, we're talking about improving the community. For example, when I was a principal at Boys and Girls High School, here's an example of transformation, is when we were able to bring in a health clinic to service our children. So part of me, that's the transformational part. We brought them in. We think that this will help our children in terms of their mindset, their mental health issues. But then the servant leadership part of me said, not only do I want to serve children with this clinic, I now want to open the clinic up so it could serve members of the community at large. And so that's broader in terms of that servant piece. So you just want to do good. It reminds me of a quote by Horace Mann, who was noted as one of the founding fathers of education in the United States. He says, be ashamed to die without having served a good for humanity, having done some good for humanity.
Now, you mentioned about Black leadership in public school system. What is the importance of having a person of African ancestry in the public school system, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's critically important. I think it's important that young people in particular, that they see people who look like them, because if I see something, it's more likely that I see it than I can achieve it. And if you think about it, it reminds me of the current, not only the current school systems across the country, but the way it's been since I was a child. One of the reasons why we only have 7% roughly of people of color, Black people, particularly as educators, is because 80% of the teachers in the school systems across the country are white. So children don't see themselves. And if you ask those 7%, why did they become teachers? Many of them will tell you that I became a teacher because of a teacher that I had, a Black teacher who inspired me to become a teacher. Also, it goes back to this whole thing about mindset again, in terms of expectations. There's research that supports the notion that Black teachers tend in general to have higher expectations of Black children than white teachers. So this is based on years and decades of research. And so for that alone, it's important to have Black people as educators so that they can help bring up the next generation, because we're losing generations. From your experience as an educator, if you ask children, what do they want to be when they grow up? Doctor, lawyer, police officer, fireman. It may have changed slightly, but it's very rare do you hear them say teacher.
And that's key in terms of the perception. People have a perception that teachers don't make that much money, which isn't true, particularly in New York. I can't think of everyone else. And certainly administrators are fine with that. It's just these perceptions of the hard life people perceive that are not. So I think there needs to be a job of really letting children know about some of the benefits of being an educator, and certainly getting more of us in there, particularly males. That seems to be an area which is shortage, getting Black males to consider teaching positions. And I don't know if there's any efforts you're aware of to build the number of Black males that are in the classroom, as well as in the principalship. Tell me about that role, being a Black, being in there, sitting in that seat, and some of the challenges, one of the challenges that you face in that capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know of many organizations. I know there are probably a handful that around the country that are working to recruit Black educators, so that, because you got to have the pipeline, right? You can't have Black principals until you have Black teachers, and then those teachers become assistant principals, et cetera. But here's the biggest challenge, even for starting with teachers, that we know based on the research that Black boys have a different experience than, say, white boys or even white girls for that matter. And when I say different experience, you're more likely to be placed in special education, you're more likely to be suspended. So for many of us, and this is mine included, our experience in education has been trauma. We've been traumatized by the system. So that alone makes us not want to come into the system. Ironically, that very trauma is what motivated me to come back, to become a leader, a teacher first, and then ultimately a leader. But when we recruit Black teachers, particularly Black men, we have to, in a way, which is kind of crazy, but to protect them from the same harms that we have to protect our boys from within the system. And so just like the systems across the country tend to harm children of color, the same thing happens to educators. If you talk to Black men who enter the system and then 2 or 3 years later leave, they'll tell you because they felt as if they weren't heard. Their voices weren't heard. They weren't able to be themselves, their authentic self to the job, and often cast aside. So that's the teacher. Now, if you make it through, let's say the system, and then you become a principal, the same thing happens there. I remember once when I was a principal at Beach General High School in Queens, we had the principal walk through, the walk around. We had all the principals walk to the school. And when they were in my school, they said, well, we noticed your bulletin boards. You need to update your bulletin boards. We noticed that when the children raised their hand, they raised their hand, they were polite. And so I was like, that's some kind of feedback. I was expecting something more, robust in terms of the feedback. Then we went to my school serviced primarily African-American, Latino students and some whites. Then we went to an all-white school, largely all-white, and they didn't have bulletin boards, and the students were late to class, but the feedback was very favorable to this principal, who happened to be white. And so I brought up the fact that I said, I think that there's a difference in the way we view things because my school is such and such, you had this, so maybe it has something to do with the race of the children. And when I said that, it was as if Moses had parted the Red Sea because everyone moved away from me. And I realized then when you talk about race, when you talk about the reality of race, it makes people very uncomfortable and then they move away from you.
Let's talk about that one, the role of social capital versus educational leadership.
Right. So social capital is a critical component of any level of leadership, frankly, any level of anyone within the building in terms of a school building. Because really, in a nutshell, social capital, while there are books that are written on it, it comes down to the power of relationships, right? The leveraging of relationships, the value of relationships. When people say to me, well, Gassaway, what's your net worth? I say, well, you can't find it on a chart. It's that low. But you say to me, what's my social capital net worth? I'll tell you it's in the millions. It's because of the relationships that I've established over the years. So because of my relationships with whether it be politicians, whether it be business people, whether it be people in the community, parents, et cetera, that brings about a great amount of influence or resources in addition to whatever the school budget is that I could bring into my building. Millions of dollars are lost because people don't invest in other individuals, because that's really what it is, investing in people and investing in relationships. And I think that if you're not utilizing social capital, you're not leading as effectively as you can. Part of the social capital piece is also the knowledge piece in terms of, we talked about governance, understanding, who holds the power within the system, whether it be the policies, whether it be the funding power, the authorities. You need to know who's who in order to approach these people, to be able to, again, establish these relationships and then bring these resources into the school system. So it's important to be technically, what I call technically sound as a school leader. You have to know your business. You have to know the game. You have to know the rules of the game. Because if you don't know the rules of the game, you're likely to lose at it.
So how does someone identify? I'm a new principal. I'm got in a school, in a community that's challenged. How do I identify someone who I can go to, who I can feel comfortable? What criteria do you think someone should look for a potential mentor?
Yeah, I think that people have to, again, look at their network, right? Because I may not know of another principal or former superintendent who can help guide me, but somebody I know that I trust may know of someone who then I can connect with that person. People have said to me, I would do a seminar, for example, and a young person would say to me, Dr. Gassaway, will you be willing to be my mentor? And I say to them, well, that's not necessarily how I do it, because it's like being your mentor is like starting a relationship. And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you, I'll give you a copy of my book. It's not about buying the book, but you can do that as well. But I'll give you a copy of my book. You read the book. And once you finish reading the book, then call me. We'll have a discussion about it. And then we can look to develop a relationship. Because I believe that a solid, sound mentorship is one that can develop organically, not one that's necessarily prearranged. You know, whenever I look at mentors that I have, I don't even recall ever saying to the person, I would like for you to be my mentor. I never said to Dr. Young or Frank Mickens, you know, will you be my mentor? It just organically evolved. But you have to be engaged in different arenas in order to make these connections with people. And also, even in terms of mentorship, in social capital as well, I looked at those two linked. It's the reciprocity. You have to look at not only what people could do for you, but also what can you do for them. You know, it's not a one-way street. I think if you approach it in that way, you can find more people attracted to you, and in turn, you attracted to them.
Well, I appreciate that information. And what we're going to do, we're going to pause and we're going to continue this conversation in the next episode of the Principalship. And we'll look at those community relationships that are key, those parent relationships, those relationships with the school, and certain do's and don'ts. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being with us for part one. And I just want to say that to our audience, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in, to write, and to tell a friend. And please visit our website at www.ccptv.org. But until next time, Louise Dente saying thank you.